welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome back to part 3 of our podcast, Enjoy. Di, all models of reading include comprehension, of course, but school leaders need to make sure that comprehension and vocabulary teaching are taking place for substantial amounts of time. In some schools, there is so much emphasis on phonemic awareness and phonics that there's no time left for children to read, let alone learn about the important comprehension strategies.
Yes, that is a sad fact, Phil. And the more that, this gets emphasised, the worse it's going to be, instead of having a very comprehensive approach to the teaching of reading. And, the whole aspect of comprehension begins so early, both what children are able to do and what we should teach. I can think of an example of a child in their first year in a school in New York where I was working, and she was reading a book about a lady buying shoes in a shop. Yep. And when the teacher was talking to her about what the book was about, the girl said, well, I can tell that it must have been summer because in the pictures there were lots of sandals in the shop and there were no boots. And of course that's very important in New York. You wouldn't be wearing sandals in the winter, but you would be wearing boots, so it must be summer. And so she had inferred that because nowhere in the book did the author say what the season was. And, of course, she'd inferred it from the illustrations, which, again, I think it's so important for children to realise what the role of illustrations are in comprehension. And, it will help them work out words as well, but we have to be very careful about what we tell kids to do and not do. And the teacher gave her very explicit feedback. I love the way you've inferred that it's summer because of what you can see in the illustrations. That's what good readers do. And, the more explicit you are about all other strategies, the better. Of course, you can say, I love the way you used the letters in that word to work out what it was. But we need to make those sorts of statements about vocabulary and comprehension so that children realise how important they are.
That's right.
But we don't want to ignore all of the word-solving strategies either. And there are more ways to figure out how to say a word than using letter-sound relationships.
So teachers can teach all of those during shared reading, can't they? And that would mean children would learn to apply them rather than just doing meaningless exercises.
Yes, definitely. We can show them how to decode a word using the letters in a word and knowing the possible sounds. And that will help them to say the word. But I also want the children to look for such things as rhyme, R-I-M-E, patterns in some words because of the particular word. For example, if they wanted to read the word lay, as in a chicken will lay an egg, then if they just start at the beginning of the word and are thinking only about sound-symbol relationships or that looking at the letter and figuring out the sound, they might say y. Instead of noticing at the end of the word the rhyme, R-I-M-E, A-Y, and saying lay. And, they can use analogy in helping with that as well, that if they know the word day, which is very common and it's around them all the time because of the days of the week, then they can work out how to say lay. But we need to explicitly teach those strategies for working out how to say a word, as well as just the letter and the sounds that might go with it. So we want also children to use context to help with reading. even just the saying of words. So by using meaning or semantic cues, this is often a great support to work out what a word is and also predict the meaning of the word. So let me give you an example. If the word wave is in a text, what does it mean? Does it mean to give a hand wave, or is it a wave in the sea? And the reader needs to use the context to be sure of the meaning. And if it's an illustration to help, then of course a competent reader would also use that additional information. So it's really building this well-rounded reader who's using all of the strategies possible.
Yeah. The more you've got, the better, isn't it, really?
That's right. And then in another situation, the pronunciation of a word might be the issue. For example, whether to say read or read will depend on the syntax of the sentence. So today I will read a book, but yesterday I read a book. So it's exactly the same spelling, R-E-A-D, but pronounced very differently because of the syntax of the sentence.
Yep.
So all of these cues help with reading, plus self-correcting if necessary. We want the children to be continually monitoring what they're saying when they read, using all of the cues possible. So does it look right? And that's when I look at those letters and say this word, do they go together? Does that match? Does it make sense? So when this word is in a sentence, is it all making sense? And does the sentence sound right is to do with the syntax of the sentence, the grammar of the sentence, how it strings together so that it's really what a sentence would be. And I just can't believe that people think we don't all use all of those cues to help us read. It's just extraordinary to me that some people are saying now, and in America in particular, where it's even become law in some states, but I hope it's not in Australia yet, that children shouldn't use all cues when they're reading, or they shouldn't use pictures to help sometimes. So it's sort of like cues has become a dirty word, which is just terrible.
Yeah.
So, okay, looking at the words is essential, but guessing the words is not appropriate.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean children shouldn't learn what competent readers do to figure out how to say words and to ensure they understand what they're reading. And this is going to involve many, many strategies or cues that will help us work out what the word is.
Because reading really is problem solving. I think someone once said it's really, you're looking for evidence, you're problem solving, you're doing all these things, and you need as many strategies as are out there that are effective, not just one strategy.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And, in relation to that, even if there is a teacher saying somewhere that the child should read on and read back and guess the word, they don't really mean guess as in just make it up. They're really saying look for evidence that will help you predict that word.
Yes.
And I think it's unfortunate that this has been picked up on as though the teachers are just saying, well, do whatever you like to guess the word. And I don't know of a teacher who really means that.
Yeah, it's not a random thing. It's actually a very targeted thing. Can you explain, Di, there's an onset rhyme connection in the decodable text, but...
Oh, definitely.
But when you're teaching onset rhyme, you're doing it more thoroughly than you would be if you were just giving them decodable text. That's what I'm saying, I guess.
Oh, right. Yes, actually making use of the knowledge about why the words are working that way.
That's right.
And explaining, even in a decodable text, perhaps why all of these words are being pronounced the same way is because when we look at the ending of a syllable, you're going to see the same patterns that might be at right throughout the text.
But a teacher using decodable text in a standard way would not be teaching that way, would they? They would just be trying to connect the sound of the letter with...
of each letter, they'd be thinking, And that's why they'll sort of talk about using decodable text to help children practice their phonics, but they're really helping them practice onset rhyme work. And that's fine, but I think just as the pundits say we should be very explicit and explain why and how, then teachers shouldn't confuse something like pat as being p-at with it being p-at. And, that part, the A is pronounced the same way all the time because it's the at. If it was just an A by itself, which, we've talked a bit about, then it's not going to be predictable in the way that it can be pronounced. So the more that the teacher knows about language work, the better off they're going to be able to use any kind of text, including decodable texts.
Okay.
It was Margaret Mustafa who did so much research around the use of onset rhyme and found that even children who were having really extreme sort of language delay problems were easily able to do things like, if they knew pat and they knew bay, then they would also be able to recognise bat and pay, that they were able to change that onset of words and make use of the rhyme, the R-I-M-E, of the other word to be able to read and write the word. So it was profoundly helpful for kids that, need that support of practicing a particular kind of text.
So they're able to read more words than they would have because they know these onset rhymes.
Definitely, yep.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, there are about 37 very reliable rhymes, as in, if I come to AT, it's very reliably going to be at. In fact, there's only one word where it isn't, and that's what. And so there are those 37 reliable rhymes that if we do work with those and the children recognise them as a reader and able to spell them as a writer, they'll know immediately then more than 500 words. So it's very powerful work to do just to help quickly expand what children can recognise as a reader and be able to spell correctly. It's good work. And I rarely hear people when they're talking about making sure you teach phonics. I don't think I can remember any of them talking about, and you must also do onset rhyme work. It's as though I think, do they know about it? Because they're not mentioning how important it is.
Yes, and just to be clear, when the teacher teaches with a decodable in a traditional way, they're not worrying about that aspect of it leading to reading more words. It's more just focusing on a particular sound, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And, using that analogy that if I know this word, then that will help me with X number of other words is a very, very important thing for children to learn about. I once had a student in one of my classes when I was working at one of the universities, and she was really poor at spelling, as in probably every third word was misspelled. And so when I sat down with her and talked about this, she really thought every word was a separate word to learn to spell. Yeah. That you didn't think, if I know how to spell physique, how will that help me spell technique? So, and realising that meant she improved dramatically out of sight within a couple of weeks. So that working out what reading and writing of words because of other words is very, very helpful.
Because the brain is really constantly searching for patterns and trying to connect things, isn't it? So.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And, when we're talking about explicit teaching, that's the sort of explicit part I like kids to learn about, that, how this will help them do that. And now you have a go at that in your own reading and writing.
Yep. So the more strategies we've got and the more strategies the child has got to help them with reading, the better. I think many years down the track there will be a number of adults out there saying, thank goodness I went to a school where they taught me all the reading strategies and did not focus on one more than others.
You're not kidding. But, that would be commented on much earlier than adulthood. By the time students reach higher grades, if they've been in a school where the teachers have focused so much on just one strategy to the detriment of others, then they'll be making a comment, just like in schools in England, where the focus has been on teaching synthetic phonics without the same focus on comprehension and vocabulary. They already realise by the upper grades that comprehension is really lacking because it wasn't dealt with. Very important reason to start with, right from the start, to teach comprehension strategies.
Yep.
And, most of the teachers in Australia are already really doing good work in that way. They want to know how to help each and every child. And it's infuriating to me how some people want to continually denigrate Australian teachers, in the press in particular, but it's, happening because of some particular educators, particularly about how they teach children to read. And, these people make claims that teachers are not teaching phonics and are all telling children to just guess words. Such blanket statements infer that these practices apply to all teachers. But in my 57 years of teaching and consulting, I've not found an Australian school where those claims are true. So I wonder to myself all the time, what do these people have to gain by telling such lies in the media and to politicians? They make claims that researchers found the best way to teach reading is by using synthetic phonics, even though those claims are not true also. You know, when you're talking about the best way of teaching reading, you can't make such a claim because that's not what research is saying.
Yep.
So, you know, even right back to in the report of the National Reading Panel, which was 2000, and that was a panel that was going back and looking at all of the different research that had been done about how to best teach reading and what was required. And unfortunately, it wasn't really thorough because they only used quantitative research, not qualitative as well. And they didn't look at everything really thoroughly. But even so, they stated that phonics alone will not suffice and fails to match the benefits over time for approaches to beginning reading that are more comprehensive and multifaceted.
Yep.
So, you know, some people will say, well, in the National Reading Panel report, it says, you know, these are the big five, but then they go on emphasising just one of those strategies rather than all of them, and it's just not good enough for the kids.
Yep.
And, you know, I personally trust the professionalism of teachers to teach each child to be able to use phonics to help their reading and writing, and not to spend so much time on this component of reading that other components are ignored, or not assigned sufficient time to teach the children how to use them effectively. So that's why I've provided 2 documents that you'll mention in the show notes that include a scope and sequence plus a process for teaching letter-sound relationships, to read words and for spelling.
Yep.
And then I trust that teachers will be able to determine what specific their students require, and that they'll be able to ensure the purpose for developing phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, or teaching phonics, is to apply that learning to the acts of reading and writing, rather than just being ends in themselves, where the kids spend so much time doing exercises from programs that they don't even apply what they're learning to their own reading and writing.
Yeah, there seems to be 2 major flaws, and one is to just focus on one aspect of reading, and the other one is to use a program to teach it.
Oh, yes, and you know, programs cost a lot of money.
Yep.
And, you know, money that's really required to buy more books for children to read.
Yep.
You know, schools do not have enough money in the main, especially in public schools. They don't have enough money to buy all the books that they want. So if you don't need to buy a program, then you shouldn't. And if you've got a scope and sequence to work from, and you're systemic about how you go about making sure everything's dealt with from that scope and sequence, then why do you need a program?
Yeah.
It's just to make sure that what needs to be taught is taught. But of course, if you've already got children who can do particular things, then you don't waste time on them either. And, you know this by looking at the scope and sequence. You don't need a program to be able to do that.
So a school can have a scope and sequence, and they can work that out together, and also have some really good PD and really great books, and really we don't need to spend the dollars that they're having to spend every year. Often it's an ongoing fee they have to pay to keep that program too.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And, it's also interesting that, if we've got a government providing funds for just one aspect of reading and not all of the others, then guess what's going to happen?
Yep.
And, it's the children who concern us, isn't it? It's all very well, and perhaps one child might need a lot more of something than another, but a teacher should be able to work that out, especially if the money is being spent on good professional development for teachers. All of your podcasts are free. So a school could really do a lot of great professional learning without it costing them a huge amount of money to do it.
Huge amount.
And you provide show notes with articles and work to do that goes with those podcasts.
Yep.
And look, there is so much available online to learn about.
It's teachers being steered in the right direction, isn't it? Because there is so much out on the internet. We have produced a course by David Hornsby called Understanding English Orthography, and it's very in-depth on understanding how English is not just a phonological language, it's multifaceted. So that's a really good course if people really want to understand in years F to 2 more about how our language does work in those early years.
That's right. Because the English language is not purely phonetic, and the morphemic aspect of it is essential to learn about and for teachers to understand so that they include that in their work. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for kids when they know things like, the word two is spelled T-W-O, even though you don't hear the W, because it's related in meaning to twin and twice. So, we want kids to understand that English isn't a crazy language.
No.
And if we only stick to the phonetical structure of words, then it does seem crazy in places. So
another problem really is that because it takes a little bit of work to understand how comprehensive reading is, media and governments are just looking for a simple message. They don't quite understand what's involved in this. And so if they hear someone say, it's easy, just concentrate on this one thing and there's your program to do it. So
that's right.
All fixed.
Yep. And in countries that have tried that already, it doesn't work.
Yep.
So we should be learning from that, not going down the path of failed programs in other places, especially because we've seen such great work in places in Australia. I know in the Western Metropolitan region of Melbourne several years ago, a great regional leader, and I think this is where we've got to look for good leadership from the top. Working with her, we were able to provide professional learning for every principal, every coordinator, every teacher across a whole region, and it became the most improved region in Australia.
Yep.
And that was teaching them about everything to do with reading and writing, not just one aspect of it. So it's been proven that it can be done. An OECD report was written about how successful that was. So I really think we need the leaders of all kinds, political and within education systems, to be pointing principals and teachers in the right direction of where they can learn from people who are really knowledgeable. And I know I was reading something online the other day and I went, who is this person? Why do they suddenly think they're an expert? Because I can actually see things that they've written that are totally wrong.
Yep.
Not just in terms of theory, but about the English language.
Yep.
So, you've also got to be careful about who you're going to lead people to learn from.
And once people have learnt these things and they've practiced them in their schools, that stays with them. Even though you've done that work in the Western Metropolitan region, there are still leaders and teachers out there that are still benefiting from that PD that happened a while ago.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm talking about work that happened prior to 2010, but I can still go back to schools in that area where some of the teachers have become principals, and they still understand what reading is and writing is really all about, and are stunned about some of the new things that are being forced upon them because they know more than that. And it is really a matter of there's more to the picture than some people are trying to make out or are funding. So, but those people, you're right, they will not forget that, and they can't go back to doing less. No. Because they know the more is so important. But look, it's our responsibility in education to be continually reading widely and building up our knowledge, because if we're going to pass information on to other teachers, then we've really got to be sure about what we're saying. It's children who are affected by what's done.
Now, Di, we've talked a little bit about phonological awareness, but is there more we should discuss, and what about phonemic awareness?
Yep, let's go back and talk a bit about that, because both of those certainly were listed in that national reading panel, and I think that all states probably include those in the total content they want schools to work with. So regarding phonological awareness, so far we've spoken about syllables and how many syllables in a word, and that knowledge helps you read. And then onset and rhyme, structuring words, we've also dealt with that. So they're both to do with hearing sounds in language. And then another aspect is children even hearing words that rhyme, that's R-H-Y-M-E, words that sound the same. But of course, you don't need to spend a lot of time with specific lessons or teaching about that. That hearing words that R-H-Y-M-E is pretty easily developed if you've taught your kids lots of nursery rhymes, poems and songs with rhyming words, and even some stories have rhyming words. And you can explain what rhyming means in that instance and ask children to listen for rhyming words in the poems, etc., they've learned. And of course, some children may already know about rhyming and it's already there, and yet others might need some small group work to help with this. It's interesting, actually, that all of the research done around phonological awareness and phonemic awareness was done with small groups. So you do wonder about whole classes spending time, sometimes a huge amount of time, on this work. And it doesn't require large amounts of time, this aspect of what words rhyme. And then other experiences are more important that you might want to spend more time on. But then when it comes to phonemic awareness, this is when listeners are able to hear, identify, and manipulate the phonemes or the sounds in words. So separating the spoken word cat into 3 phonemes, k, a, t, requires phonemic awareness, hearing those separate sounds in a word. And the most useful phonemic awareness experiences to help children with reading and writing are blending, it's blending sounds in words, or blending sounds to produce words, and segmenting sounds in a word, so that when you can segment and you hear each sound, then when you're writing, you're trying to represent each of those sounds. And it's the most common way that you'll see children try to spell unknown words. They'll actually be listening for the sounds in a word and trying to put down each of those sounds in some sort of letter representation. And actually all aspects of phonemic awareness and other components of reading and writing are dealt with really well on something that's freely available to everyone online. And it's called the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, which was produced by the Victorian Education Department. And for a while now, it's provided teachers with an excellent resource to help their professional development. So if you're not sure about a lot to do with this and you want to look at a respected resource to find out, that's a good one, the Literacy Teaching Toolkit.
Right.
So blending helps children to read as they learn to combine or blend sounds together into a word. So they're looking at a word and they're seeing letters, and then, for example, it might be a word like sat, and they can identify that in that word there's t, the phonemes or sounds, but by running those sounds together, then they would be able to read the word sat. But you've got to be very careful as a teacher about how you do it. If you say t, then that's not quite sat. So you have to say it more like sat or sat, so that it sort of sounds more like a word, and you run it together as much as you can.
Oh, okay.
Of course, I was automatically going at because I'm thinking of the rhyme at in the word.
Yes.
And then segmenting, when you're listening for how many sounds in a word, like in the word dog, there are 3 sounds, d, o, and g. And in shop, even though there are 4 letters, there's still only 3 sounds, sh, o, p. But in stop, there are 4 sounds, st, o, p. So you can understand why hearing each sound when you say a word can help with spelling. And then there's a tool that Mary Clay used to make sure was in a reading recovery session, using a tool called Elkonin boxes, or sound boxes, some people might know them as. And Erie talks a lot about them these days as being really helpful for children to learn to read and write. And what it is, it's a row of boxes is drawn. Think of them as like cubes, just squares that are joined together, or rectangles joined together, and a box for each sound in a word. So how many boxes would I need for shop? I would just need 3 because I've got 3 sounds. But for stop, I need 4 boxes because there are 4 sounds, right?
Right.
And when you start out, you might just be wanting children to think about how many sounds, and they might just push a disc into each box as they hear and say a sound, or, perhaps a 1-cent coin or something, just anything like that. But more research is now saying that if you provide the letters for this task so that children can hear the sound in a word and then select a letter or even a letter combination like SH to put into the box, then the faster they're going to be able to use that information for reading.
Yep.
Whereas, we used to be told, to only use the discs. Now it's been shown that if we use letters as well to place in those boxes, that will be helpful. So this is what I mean by keeping up to date with the research as well. That is so important.
The science is never settled, is it?
No. Otherwise it's not science.
Yeah.
Science is continually forming hypotheses, checking them out, and when necessary, changing them.
And magnetic letters on a magnetic board would be helpful, I suppose.
Oh, just so perfect. I really encourage teachers to have a set of magnetic letters, making sure they're easy to find, so they're kept in alphabetical order in a big box, not just a mass of them that might take ages to find each letter. So if they've got those on a table as a permanent thing, and you can print out from a model of what a 3-letter or a 4-letter or a 5-letter word might need, how many boxes together. There are models for doing that online.
Right.
So you can have those printed out, you can have your magnetic letters and the words you're learning at the time. Then the children can be working with the letters and the boxes to actually notice the parts of the word and how they would put them together and be able to read those words. It's a very, very good experience for kids to do, especially those who need more help with that.
So just to be clear, blending helps with the children reading, correct?
Yes.
And segmenting is more about helping with them spelling what the letters are in the word?
Yes, that's right. Although it's interesting, isn't it, that learning about how to segment will help you blend. Learning how to blend will help you segment. So they really go together very well.
Reciprocal.
But in terms of usage, that I like to show the kids how that could help them with their reading or help them with their spelling.
Okay, yep. So that's great. And this is explained more in our online course about teaching spelling in the foundation year, which will be referred to in the show notes. Not quite ready yet, but it will be there. So we've been working on that. And I presume the words that you would use for this blending and segmenting work would be from your shared reading books or your class written language experience texts?
Yes, because if we're going to be learning how to read or spell words, then we want them to know the meaning of them, otherwise it's pointless. And if we've been doing a lot of shared reading, they'll learn the meaning of a lot of those, what we call tier 1 words, just because they read them in context and get to understand what the meaning is. So I'm not just going to pull a word out of the air or someone else's list. The more that we use the words that are in what the children are already reading and writing, then the more useful this work will be. Because in shared reading, the children have to look at the word, say the word, and then join in, and they're doing that by joining with you when you're reading the word. And, when you say a word, then you can hear what sounds are in it. You can't just look at a word and think what sounds are in it. You have to say it before you can hear the sounds. So I prefer them to be saying words that they already know from the look and the meaning and the context, and then we're specifically listening for how many sounds and learning about that letter-sound relationship.
And this was where we're simplifying the teaching by not having to make another whole set of resources or to buy a program or have something new. We've actually got the things that we're actually using every day can be the things that we use for all these ranges of things. It makes our teaching easier.
And much more meaningful for the children because they already know the meaning of the word and they're familiar with it in context.
Right. Yep.
And reading isn't just saying words.
Yes.
It's comprehension as well, isn't it?
Well,
we all know that.
That's the enjoyable part about reading, isn't it? Like,
yes.
So what about the learning of letter names, Di? Where does this fit in?
Well, first of all, it's one of the most important things to make sure children know at the start of a foundation year, and you have assessments to find that out. And if they don't, or which ones they don't know, then you need to work at helping the children learn them. And the reason for this is because the letters, what we're going to talk about, that's their label. So even if I want to tell you how to spell a word, I have to know the names of the letters to tell you that. I can't just, if I said then you might write down an F where it's a PH. So that's why I've got to be able to name the letters.
It's a reference point.
So, absolutely. And, it's what you're going to be using for all of the rest of the time when you're talking about phonics and rhymes and everything, then the names of the letters are going to be used constantly. So that's why it's important for the children to know them as soon as possible. And finding out at the start of the year so that you know who you need to work with and who you don't need to waste time on that learning.
Yep.
And many children will start school knowing all of them, and some will start school knowing none.
Yeah.
And I often think that that's because some parents think they shouldn't do that before their children go to school. But at Elston Week, for example, last year we decided that the teachers should inform the parents of children who are going to start school this year about how important it was for the children to know letter names. And I even gave them some ways to learn how to do it so that it was useful and enjoyable and it didn't become a chore to the parents and the children. And this year, many more children came to school already knowing their letter names. So that was very helpful for the class to jump into other experiences much sooner.
And that's where singing the ABC or ABC books, concentrating on
alphabet books and so forth, but always naming the letter.
Yeah.
So calling it an A, not an A, because the letter A, of course, isn't always an A. It represents multiple sounds. So just learning the letter names, and not one at a time, but we know now that you can learn all of the letter names all of the time.
Yep.
And that's a big difference too. A lot of teachers in the past would have taught each letter by itself, one at a time.
Yeah.
It takes forever. So if all the children know most of the letter names, the teachers can move on to phonological awareness tasks. And then, of course, remember, some children can already read when they start school. So those children don't need to spend time on phonological awareness tasks or phonics, because the purpose of those is to help you learn to read.
Yeah.
So if you can already read,
job done.
Then what you need to be doing is reading.
And plenty of it, and comprehending.
Well, exactly. And that might well be something that the children might need more help and explicit teaching about.
Yeah.
But
and increasing vocabulary and going into more complex texts and
exactly, so much else to do. So, and look, I know that we need to think about planning that in our classrooms, but frankly, if you've got some children who don't know the names of the letters or need some phonemic awareness work or even phonics work, probably not having your whole class is going to be better, because your group's going to be small enough for you to make sure every child is engaged in whatever you're doing. And when you've got, 25 kids, you can't really be sure that they're all engaged in whatever you're doing.
No. And as they get older, there's still word-solving strategies like prefixes and suffixes and...
yes, there's so many other aspects of our language, because it's more phonic, that there is to learn about in relation to how to say them.
Yep.
All of the researchers, including those who call themselves science of reading researchers, really want the phonemic awareness and phonics work to be over and done with as soon as possible in the first couple of years.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful about making sure that it doesn't, drag on just because you think it should. If there are children who still need help with that, then of course you're going to still be helping them. But because of the work you're doing, you'll know specifically about what kids are doing. And how do I know? Because I listen to them read. And I find out if they can apply that knowledge to reading or look at their writing. I can tell an enormous amount by looking at how they write. And then we know about who needs more help with what.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, other information about the learning of letter names concerns the introduction of the sounds that the letters represent. And again, for a long time, we were told as teachers, when introducing letters, don't include the sounds with the letter names, just stick to the letter names. Well, the researchers are now saying once children get to know a number of letter names, teachers can start to introduce a sound that might match a letter.
Yep.
But you've got to be very careful because English is not phonetic. It's not each letter only represents one sound. So, for example, the letter P could be a P sound, but then when it's combined with the letter H, it becomes F. And there could be a Phoebe or a Philip in your classroom. So you don't want to confuse the children by giving incorrect information about a letter-sound relationship. You shouldn't pretend that it's just always P says P, because that's not always true.
Yeah. And I think David Hornsby's course takes teachers on a journey through all this work in a detailed way, which is good.
Wonderful, Now, I know anything I've written about too, the sort of scope and sequence really, and how to learn about letter-sound relationships. That article is also mentioned in the show notes. So
it's all in there. And we'll take a break there from part 3 of our podcast. We look forward to you joining us for part 4.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.